All right, today our focus of our lecture is going to be government intervention when the government gets involved in pricing. And we're going to look at price controls. Price controls are anytime the government gets involved with the equilibrium price. If you are watching this at home, you want to have your textbooks out to page 113, and you'll be able to see the demand and supply charts, the equilibrium price, and when price controls come in. The two price controls we're going to look at are price floors and price ceilings. Most of my lecture will be on price ceilings, and then you'll be able to link and watch the Khan Academy lecture on price floors. So let's begin with our price ceilings. So a price ceiling is when the government mandates a maximum allowable price for a good. So that means they're not going to allow a price to go above a certain level. And you can see this if you look on page 113. It is the graph on the bottom. So if we look at this, this is an apartment building in New York is going to be our example of price ceiling. And this is where the government says, we're not going to let the price get too high. Remember, this is below the equilibrium price. So we're going to keep it below the equilibrium price. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, one reason to do it is because some people may not be able to afford that equilibrium price. And what if we're talking about something like housing? We do have a situation of homelessness in this country. We do have many people in this country who don't have a place to live. So should there be like an artificially low price for the poor and some places for them to live? Most people, when they hear that right away, probably answer is yes. But we're also going to look at how this affects equilibrium price. So let's just take a look at a real life example. So we're going to look at New York City, and we're going to look at what's called rent controls. So, in New York City back in 1942, this is during World War II. In 1942, the United States of New York City had a program of shipbuilding. So they needed to get workers to come into New York to make ships, other munitions and arms for manufacturing. So one of the places where many of these were built were Brooklyn Navy Yard. So there was a rapid increase of labor and lots of people moving to New York. Now, the market did not have enough time to, have enough individual people build apartments. It was also World War II, so it would have been a difficult time to do this. Everything was being built for the war. So they needed places for people to live. And given that, a ton of people were coming in, apartment buildings are capital, the landlords were in a position where there is a high demand and a low supply. So what that should have done in 1942 is that would have driven the prices way up. And you've had a lot of people not having places to live. And these are people that the U.S. government asked to come into New York and build ships. And now you're not going to give them a place to live at a decent price. So the country needed this. So what they decided to do was, since there is so much demand and there's not enough supply, the government said, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have rent control. And this is going to be an emergency measure during the war. We're going to have a rent control and a maximum amount. So my supply-demand chart, just like the one on page 113 on the bottom, they said, yes, we realize that the equilibrium price is high for these apartments. It should, and it's actually going up because we are seeing a demand shift, which would mean that the prices should be going up. The equilibrium price should go up. But what we're going to do is we are artificially going to put the price low because we need these people who are being patriotic, who are taking jobs, building ships. They got to have a place to live. So we're going to say, instead of charging on today's money, maybe $1,500 or $2,000 for an apartment, we're going to put it at $600 so people can afford it. Now, in New York, when you start things like this, to start programs like this, it's great, it's got a good cause to it. One of the problems, though, it's really hard to end a program like this. Because to end a program like this after the war would mean that you would have to tell some people that, your rent's going to go up because there's demand, we don't need this government intervention anymore, and that would make the politicians very unpopular. But here's some unintended consequences, which always come up in economics. Unintended consequences. We can't predict what's going to happen. So what happens is some weird practices have come up. Some unintended consequences are like the practice of subletting. What has happened in New York is a lot of people now, today, who, and actually for the last 30, 40 years, who have maybe got an apartment in New York. They lived there when they were young. They weren't making much money. These might be college-age professionals just starting off. This could be people who didn't have a very good job. They weren't making a whole lot of money. And they got one of these rent-control apartments in New York, and it was great for them. Then they get married, and they decide, I don't want to live in the city anymore. I'm going to go move to the suburbs, maybe Connecticut or somewhere. But they see that, wait a minute, I have this apartment at a real low price, and my name's on the lease. Maybe I'll just keep my name on the lease. Since the rules of New York, the rules are in New York with this rent control, is that you can keep the rent control apartment, and they won't change the price until you move. So what happens is prices go up when people move out and new people move in is one of the laws they put on this. So for many people who are living in these apartments, they think, well, I'm going to go move to the suburbs, we'll get a house out there, but I'm going to keep my name on here because this is a $600 a month I'm paying for rent, and I know the other apartments in the area that aren't rent control are charging $2,000. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my name on the apartment, and I'm going to sublet it or rent it to someone else for maybe $1,800. And I'll just keep the $1,200, and they're kind of like an unofficial landlord who the government is subsidizing now. The government's basically giving them a cheap rent. The government's paying the difference, and now they're making a profit. And this is happening in New York with these apartments. Happens quite a bit. This is called subletting. This is unintended consequences. And this drives the price back up to the equilibrium. But what we have is the government paying a lot of money, and now a person who's living in the suburbs of New York is making money out of this. So another thing that's happening is there is something called key money that's been happening in New York, where people who were landlords, what they'll do is landlords of the apartments, is they'll say, okay, well, I'll rent you this apartment. Maybe give me like $500, $1,000 under the table, black market. You know, say like, give me $1,000 and I'll rent it to you. Well, you can't. Oh, I guess we don't have any apartments for rent. This is called key money, and this happens too. And there's also a number of other things that happen with these rent control apartments. Landlords can raise the prices by a small amount. Not much, by a small amount when someone vacates or leaves the apartment. The reason is because they want people who have low income not to have their apartments raised. Good intention by the government. But what's happened is landlords have an incentive to have people move out quickly so they can raise prices. And if you want people to move out, you have no incentive to keep the place looking nice. So what often happens is the place doesn't look very nice, they don't want to fix it up very much, and they don't really care about keeping the tenants happy, because if they move, they can charge the next person more money, and so they're not a very good place to live. Also because of this, because these prices are artificially low, the supply has gone down. If you look at this, suppliers want to make money. If you look at our supply and demand chart. So when we have a low price, an artificial equilibrium price, many people who would have built apartments in New York are not doing it. So what happens if supply goes down? Well, supply goes down, so prices for other apartments go up or down. They go up, so there's not as many apartments now. And this is kind of keeping other apartments' prices up, actually, because people don't want to build because of these rent control laws. So what's happened is the government realizes, okay, the government has to get involved again. Now what the government has to do is the government has to fix this supply, so the government has to make more apartments. So when the government has to make more apartments, what they do is they build apartments, but oftentimes these are kind of like not very good places to live. We call these projects. And they're very unpleasant, and it's led to a lot of poor people in one area, and it hasn't worked very well. So the government first got involved by lowering the prices, which was good intention to give poor people a place to live. Then what happened was, there wasn't enough apartments, so the government had to build new ones, but they were government-run apartments, which aren't as well run, and led to a lot of the projects that we see in New York City today. So these are some unintended consequences, and what can happen with price ceilings. For our next part of the lecture, we're just going to talk about price floors, and there's a link on here. It's on the blog as well. I'll put it on the blog where you can watch it. That's from Khan Academy. And I'm going to just define for you what a price floor is. A price floor, it's also on page 113 near the top. A price floor is an artificially high price. an artificially high price for something you're selling. So that means you're putting up the price higher so the supplier can get more money. And we're going to talk about this in minimum wage, how minimum wage is an example of a price floor. And this would be, we're not going to go by equilibrium price. Instead, we're going to go by putting a wage up a little bit higher. So we'll talk about price floors, and I'll let you watch the link for Khan Academy on that one.